bother. So let's go ahead and move on. Let's move away. I always hate doing episodes where there's a bunch of, like, sex assaults. Because I can't do jokes. I can't do jokes during that stuff. It's rough. It's rough for me. So let's go ahead and move on to a murder. These ones are generally easier to do. And actually, let me say this right off the bat. We'll cover the murder today. This story was recommended by Gary via email. And his email was basically, hey, check out this weird cult that recently had a murder connected to it. Sounds like it's right up your alley. And that basically, the research for that gave me 4 episodes worth of stuff. So we're going to go ahead and start that today. Now, today let's cover the murder. And tomorrow we'll actually go a little more into who Sherry Shriner is. But there's so much stuff going. She has like 14 different websites, a relatively huge following. It's such a bizarre story. But let's start with the catalyst right now. Thanks, Gary, for the email. But you really cost me like a ton of time researching this. Whenever I thought I was like ready to go with the episode, I was like, oh, now I got a Orgone. So I had to go research more about Orgone and all that. So we'll get into that. That'll be its own episode. But let's go ahead and start with the murder right now. That's a good way to break it up. First, we'll talk about the murder, and then tomorrow, and it's not going to be every episode just all about that, but I think it's easier to piece it up rather than to gloss over much of it. The year is 2017. The date, July 15th. It's 11 days after the 4th of July. America's birthday, some would say. Okay, I can stop doing the song. Anyways, all the marchers are gone. All the fireworks are put out. You're like, Jason, I know what happens after Friday the 13th. Not Friday. I know what happens after 4th of July. They should... Friday the 13th should be the new national holiday. We'd have like 10 of them a year. But anyway, so July 4th... I don't forget July 4th. It's July 15th, 2017. There's a little house in a place that sounds delightful. Tobyhanna, Pennsylvania. That sounds very American, although I'm pretty sure that name has some German roots. Sounds American. Tobyhanna. In this little house, a bungalow maybe, there lived a couple named Steve Mineo and Barbara Rogers. Now, we know one thing for sure. One of these people ends up dead. But there's 2 versions of the events. And I want to start with the version that was remotely viewed by a seer, a soldier, and actually a general in God's army, Sherry Shriner. Sherry Shriner had been following the lives of Steve and Barbara very closely. They actually used to be disciples of hers, fans, however you want to put it. They were followers of Sherry Shriner. Sherry Shriner is a woman who believes that reptilian, demonic entities, alien things are attacking us. They can skull scalp us and take our souls out and then put their own in. People can just be regular old reptiles. All that shape-shifting reptilian stuff. But you can become a reptile, like, by force. Like, one of these guys can get you and you're like, no. And they, like, suck your skull out. Well, I'm sorry, suck your soul out and then put their reptile soul in it, so then they still kind of look like you, but they can't regulate their own body temperature. Again, I think the reptilian conspiracy is one of the dumbest things, because basically everyone would be laying on rocks all the time. That's how you could tell they were a reptile. But, so these reptiles, the reptilians, can go into your body, and she began warning Steve, I think Barbara has been soul scalped. I think Barbara has been replaced with a reptilian soul. Now, her big following was on Facebook. Dozens of websites. Tons of stuff. And we'll get into more detail with Sherry Shriner when we explore her life. But right now, she has a sizable community online. And she interacted with them regularly, which is quite odd, which is a definitely odd detail. We've covered a lot of these kind of weird, wacky conspiracies before. But she was in contact with her fans or followers or disciples on Facebook. So people were posting stuff. And so a schism started to happen between Barbara and Steve and Sherry. According to Sherry, she said, Here's what happened. I started to tell Steve that I think Barbara was turning into a reptilian. Sherry actually made a YouTube video showing photos of Barbara Rogers. And in the video saying, look, you see how her eyes are in this frame? She's a reptile. She's a reptile, Steve. So Barbara, in retaliation for basically being called a reptile, starts leaning on Steve and says, we need to leave this cult. This is a cult. This woman's toxic. She's telling us that I'm a reptile? I'm not a reptile. You know I'm not a reptile. Steve feels pulled between these two women. One, a seer, a prophet of God, and the other one, the girl he's having sex with. And he's torn between these two, but eventually, the one you bang wins out. That's just the way the world works, and he leaves Sherry's cult. During this time, Barbara also posted online a video of her eating steak tartare, which I guess is like bloody meat or raw meat or something like that. And she's like, I'm not a reptile, I just love eating bloody meat. And that really sent Sherry off. She's like, no, only people who are half reptile eat bloody meat. So anyways, we're back to July 15th, 11 days after 4th of July. And Sherry has a vision. She sees this in her head, her God-given powers, literally God-given. Barbara and Steve are in bed. And Barbara is watching Resident Evil, which is based on a true story, that the character, not the zombies taking over the world, but the character Alice, the super soldier Alice, is a real human that both Sherry Shriner and Barbara Rogers know in real life. This is according to Sherry. This isn't according to me. I don't believe this. But Barbara Rogers says she was watching the Resident Evil, and that's a documentary, basically. That's a real story. But you didn't know that. And seeing the blood in Resident Evil, and whichever one, probably the third one, which was the best, seeing the blood in Resident Evil drove Barbara Rogers insane. Started turning into a reptile form. At this point, Steve, who's almost a bystander in his own story, because it's mostly been about these two women going head to head, he says, Sherry was right. No! And Barbara grabs the gun as her face is contorting into a reptilian face and begins firing. Steve starts running through the house, Jason Bourne style, but gets a bullet through the leg, falls down, and then Barbara walks up to Steve, puts the gun to his head, and blows his brains out. Now, we don't know if any of that happened. What we do know is that on July 15th, late at night, neighbors heard a pop, 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 pop. Nobody called the cops. But eventually, Barbara calls the cops herself and says, I just shot my boyfriend in the head. And when the cops show up, there's a young man with his brains are blown out, and a bullet right through the middle of his head. And Barbara goes, this is what happened. He believes that Sherry Shriner is a reptile. And he couldn't deal with the fact that the woman that he followed for so long was reptilian. So he put the gun to his own head and begged me to pull the trigger, and I didn't want to. I really didn't want to, but he begged me to because he couldn't deal with the knowledge that Sherry Shriner, God's prophet, is a reptile. So I pulled the trigger. Now, obviously, the cops have no idea who Sherry Shriner is, and it's one of those interesting things about cults. Cults are like emo bands. Cults are like those bands you've never heard of, because to you, it's like the best band ever. You're like, oh, Cheetos, this is the greatest band. Like, nobody else knows who they are. Or is it Chiodos? It doesn't matter. Nobody else knows who they are. But if you're into that music scene, they're like the best. And they are pretty good. But this is the same thing with a cult. That cult dominates your life, so you just assume everyone else kind of knows about the cult, unless it's supposed to be some secret underground satanic cult. You'd have people like Sherry Shriner being like, the world's against us, but we are the knowledgeable ones. And everyone's like, yay. Well, they're not in the person. They're all clapping out. They're typing clapping in Facebook. But you know what I mean? Like, you would assume everyone would know who Sherry Shriner is if that was all you knew. The cops are like, we have no idea what you're talking about, dude. We have no idea what's going on here. Now, this happened back in 2017. She was just recently convicted in March of 2019. She was convicted of third-degree murder. So, she'll be sentenced this upcoming June. Sherry has pretty much gone silent. Her YouTube channels haven't really posted anything. A lot of YouTube channels, so I could be wrong on this, but her main ones haven't posted anything in about a year. Barbara and Steve had YouTube channels where they were speaking out against Sherry, talking about how deceptive she was and how she was trying to come in between the relationship. All this stuff, all this horrible stuff. Those videos have all been deleted. The channel's been deleted. There was no, as far as I could tell, mirror uploads. So these two, basically all that's left as an archive online is Sherry's videos talking trash about Steve and Barbara. And how I know when Steve died, he saw her as a reptile. I can sense it. I traveled there in my mind. I have these powers. His last words were, "Sherry was right about you," and you blew his brains out, you horrible woman. And Barbara really has no response to any of this. She's in jail right now. She's probably going to end up in prison. Sherry accuses her to this day of being a vampire, witch, reptilian super soldier. It's when we get into a lot of Sherry's personal stuff, you'll see how she just throws terms together. And the crazy thing is that people really fall for this. But that's the murder that's going to open up this world of Sherry Shriner. We're going to take a look. We're going to take kind of an in-depth look into the different facets of her beliefs. Most of them flat out just bizarre lunacy that we're going to make fun of. But there seems to be an undercurrent to all of it. She believes she has special powers over everyone else. She believes that God has anointed her, that she's the granddaughter of David. King David, David and Goliath David. Granddaughter, somehow that works out. But anyways, the granddaughter of David. She was sent here by God to destroy the evil ones and raise up the good ones for this new kingdom of heaven. Obviously, that's all as stupid as possible. But, she claims she has all of these powers through prayer to strike down her enemies. And then she takes care of two of them in one night. One of them goes insane, saying, "She's a reptile, kill me, kill me, kill me." And the other one pulls the trigger. When somebody constantly talks about them having God's power over people, you dismiss it out of hand. But when their enemies start to be taken off the board, you have to wonder, who is Sherry Shriner? That was a clip from our daily podcast, Dead Rabbit Radio. Dead Rabbit Radio is available anywhere that you listen to podcasts. It's daily paranormal, conspiracy, and true crime news. If you want to hear the full episode that this clip came from, check the link below. Please like and subscribe. And hit that little bell, too. That does some magical stuff. Thanks, guys.